Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, a bold explorer, and I'm on a walk. And I'm on a walk in a confused state of mind. And the reason for that confusion is I've been reading a book actually that talks about the last 100 years of the landscape of this country. And that's something I want to talk about in this video, because I feel that I'm going to explore this subject a lot more in future videos. I'm walking up past Findon Church here and the Manor House, just north of Worthing where I live. And it's a very lovely part of the world. I have to say I'm very lucky that I can just jump in a van, travel 2-3 miles, and I've got access to the South Downs, which is superb. And one can walk around and enjoy the countryside, especially first thing in the morning, when very few people are about, even with the COVID situation that we've had recently, which has obviously got more people out and about because of the lockdown. And it's lovely to just get out and be at peace with the world. And yet for all that, the landscape in the last 100 years has changed. And my confusion about all of this is that in the last 100 years we've had such amazing progression. We've got the aeroplane, the motor car, we have the internet, we have the ability to travel wherever we like at speed. We have amazing mechanization and machines that do so much for us. And we're very, very lucky. And I live in a world in which people have never been healthier. They live longer than they've ever lived before. We have incredible medicine that can make them better. We also have such scientific abilities that we can operate on people and save their lives in ways that we could never have done before. We can send man into space. It's an amazing time to be alive. And yet we have, on the landscape side of things, lost so much. And this is where I'm in this weird state of confusion. Has everything that we have today been worth it? Is it worth losing the environment and the landscape that I love and cherish so much for all the other wonderful new innovations? The Victorians had given us the steam engine, and of course that changed to the diesel and then the electric train. At the beginning of the 1900s, the motor car was coming on stream. And with the advent of the motor car, roads needed to be improved. Prior to that, we had the horse and carriage as a mode of transport, or just horses, or people simply walked. They didn't go terribly far unless they had the money to travel across the country on the coaches and horses. But the motor car gave people a certain independence. But the roads, which were simple dirt tracks, had to be improved for the wheels of the motor car in order to make that work. And so that's when we started to see the tarmac roads start to improve. And not only that, these old pathways that people would either walk or ride on, they were widened, they were covered in tarmac, and people would travel on them on this combustion engine motor car. And more of them bought these cars as independence, and travelling around became a big thing. This travel has led to so much concrete, so much tarmac, so much building, that we have seen such enormous change in the last 100 years. And as I say, I'm going to explore this theme over the next, I suppose, 12 months or so in different videos. But I just want you to think about it for the moment as I introduce this idea of how much the motor car has really changed our lives. We can travel all sorts of different places, which is fantastic. But in order to do that, we need to park the vehicle somewhere. Think of all the places that we park the vehicle and all the land that is being gobbled up in order to facilitate that. I mean, it's just a massive, massive amount. You've got all the out-of-town car parks, you've got all the bypasses round villages, round towns. You have the multi-storey car parks, you have people's driveways, all of this in which people just to place their car. And of course the motorways that we have that facilitates again our ability to get around and go to wonderful places and see things and operate our businesses and deliver all those things that we want, has gobbled up swathes of this wonderful country. Now, I'm not trying to be a prude about this. I'm not trying to do it down. The progression, as I said before, has been absolutely fantastic. And it is, I suppose, this dichotomy, this conundrum of it's fantastic to progress, to have all this fantastic and wonderful stuff, absolutely. But it's the cost that is worrying me. And the more I've looked into this, the more I've read this particular book by Trevor Rowley on the landscape of the 20th century, and you've seen how much damage has been done. It's quite frightening, the speed, the pace of this change. I mean, 100 years is almost one person's lifetime, and some people are lucky enough, of course, to live to 100. And the amount of damage that has been done, not just by the motor car, but by industries, by airports, by pollution, by modern technology, plastics. We all know about the plastics in the ocean. So I'm trying to reconcile in my mind whether I would be happier for the older England or this newer one. It's not an easy thing to grasp. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad if there wasn't so many of us. I mean, the population in this small country is quite a lot, isn't it? I mean, what are we up to? 6 million? Nearly 7 million? Whatever it is, there's a lot of people in this country, and they all need servicing. They all need somewhere to live. And over that 100 years, as this population has increased, we've had to build and build and build. Houses, hundreds and thousands and millions of houses we've had to build. And so our towns have enlarged, our villages have changed from the purpose that they once were, and are now annexes many times to the actual towns, and in many cases living in the countryside is not an option for people. That the villages are pretty much now the ghettos of the rich. The village has changed with the modern technology that we have. Now we have depopulated the rural environment, so that whereas you had villages who were working for the local farms to grow food, one of the most important things that we could do for ourselves, we no longer do that. We have machines that do it, and the depopulation of farms to the point that you only have 1 or 2 people working on a farm, and possibly the people who now work on the farm or even manage the farm don't actually live at the farm but live in the towns and commute to the country. We've gone topsy-turvy somehow. It just seems so odd to me as I grapple with this change around. Even standing up here, you never quite escape the busy roads, the motor car with its noisy engines, the rumble of the tyres on the tarmac. And usually, when we're not in the COVID times, of course, the copious amounts of aeroplanes in the sky. It's interesting that you can read many books. I've got one called Vanishing England, written in 1910. And back then, at the beginning of the 20th century, people were lamenting, as I lament now, the change. Had they realised quite how big the change was going to be, I think they wouldn't have believed it. Perhaps a few people, like H.G. Wells, were able to have that vision and see into the future a little bit. But people were lamenting the old way of life, the thatched cottage, the shepherd, the country ways with the farming communities coming into the villages and the towns selling their wares and all of that. And when we look back, we see these very nostalgic photographs of that period. And in a way, I suppose it is very close to what my version of an idealistic England is. And yet, here am I, holding a digital camera, uploading to the internet and enabling people across the world to hear my lamentations. And so it's that juxtaposition of the two things that I struggle with so very much. And this is why I think it is so important that we have to preserve what we have now. You can't hold back progress, and I'm not suggesting that for a moment. But we have destroyed and changed so much in the last 100 years. We have built on perfectly good farmland that we would now can never use again, even if we needed to. I will talk more about farming in other videos coming up. But we have devoured so much of this countryside. But we can still preserve what we have. We can stop building in beautiful places and wrecking them for the next generation. It's not just farmers who are custodians of the countryside and the landscape. All of us should be those custodians for our children and our children's children. It's absolutely paramount that we somehow come round to this way of thinking. We can't go backwards, but we can determine our future.